Good evening. Welcome. Good evening. Hi. It is still Shabbat, so I will begin the evening with Shabbat Shalom. And before long, Shabbat Shalom to you. I hope you had a Shabbat that was as beautiful on the inside as it so obviously was on the outside. I'm Jonathan Blake. I'm the senior rabbi here at Westchester Reformed Temple. And I am so happy to be part of the team that brings our extended Reformed Jewish Westchester community together for this official introduction to the season of awe. So we have congregants and clergy tonight from many different congregations. Maybe you can just give yourselves a little love when you hear your congregation acknowledged. We are joined this evening by members from Temple Israel of New Rochelle. Welcome. Okay. Thank you so much. From Congregation Kolami. Hello. Great. Anyone from KTI? We know your clergy are down for the count, but we're going to wish them a speedy recovery. Hi, KTI. Community Synagogue of Rye. Hello. Welcome. And welcome back. I recognize a lot of faces. Congregation Emmanuel of Westchester. Hello. Good to see you. Scarsdale Synagogue, Temples, Tremont, and Emmanuel. Okay. Thank you. It's good. It's good. It's good. Fantastic. Jewish people needs more Elam plums, don't they? And our own Westchester Reformed Temple. Welcome. Welcome. Also, so happy to introduce to our WRT and extended Jewish community, Rabbi Sasha Bacon, who joined our team this summer. She was ordained in May and is now serving as one of the rabbis of our congregation. You'll get to meet other members of our clergy team and the clergy of our congregations that have joined together with us tonight. Also to anyone who's joining this program and service via the live stream, welcome. So nice to know that you're with us. Slichot is our chance to open ourselves up to all of the feelings that accompany this season. Yearning, awe, majesty, mystery, forgiveness, repentance, joy, hope, and the possibilities of a new year. All of that is, of course, going to be expressed and encompassed in and through the words that we will share through our Machzor, our High Holy Day prayer book, through our music, through our togetherness as a community, and it is joyful to know that little by little and bit by bit we are reassembling ourselves as community, as an extended Jewish community and a human community. And of course, through the rituals of the season, including this ritual of Slichot, a word that means forgiveness. And one of the signature rituals in our community is that at the service that will follow this evening's community program, we will change the mantles of all of the Sifrei Torah, all of the Torah scrolls from our different congregations, both ours and our guest congregations, from their daily wear to the white that is the time of the season's attire. All of the same themes that I referenced in association with the High Holy Days are also found prominently throughout the almost 60, 70-year work of Bob Dylan. And it is really exciting that I found perhaps the one other person in the Jewish world who loves Bob Dylan and thinks that his religious voice belongs in shul as much as I think it does. And that person is our guest tonight, author Dr. Stephen Daniel Arnoff, whose most recent work is About Man and God and Law, the Spiritual Wisdom of Bob Dylan, which he will have available for those who would like to purchase it right here. So I'm going to say a few words about our guest who has been with us since Erev Shabbat, since Kabbalat Shabbat last night, as part of our weekend of welcoming the season. Dr. Stephen Arnoff is currently the CEO of the Fuchsburg Jerusalem Center, which is a religious and cultural center in the heart of Jerusalem and home of signature programs of Jewish learning and culture, including the conservative yeshiva. This is only his most recent foray in nonprofit leadership. He's also served in organizations that specialize in cultural innovation, educational and communal programs in human services, including the JCC Association, Shalem College, the 14th Street Y, the 92nd Street Y, Zeke, and the Brandeis Bardeen Institute. He holds a doctorate in Midrash and scriptural interpretation from the Jewish Theological Seminary as a Wexner Graduate Fellow. He was a postdoc at the NYU School of Law, and he publishes lectures and teaches internationally on creative topics, especially the intersection between religion and rock and roll. And so it is really nice that we will get to have Stephen Arnoff hold forth tonight, both in teaching and in song, and I'm so happy to introduce him to this combined Jewish community.
Thank you, Rabbi Blake, for your warm welcome to this community, and I guess we could say this community of communities tonight. I'm honored to be with you, to study, to gather, to pray, and to sing. Now, before we do those things, I just want to make it clear, Bob Dylan actually does know how to sing. We've, had many discussions, Rabbi Blake and I, about what it all means, beginning with our preneg before Shabbat, where we had the opportunity with some really thoughtful music fans and thinkers to ask questions and to sort of muse together about the essential teachings of this artist known as Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan once said, if I hadn't been Bob Dylan, I would probably think Bob Dylan had a lot of answers myself. He is really a bit of a charlatan and a hustler as a performer. We talked last night about how Dylan is the master of the mask as a performer, presenter. He presents a face to the public which can be stern or sardonic or challenging or disruptive, but underneath that mask is an incredible trove of riches, spiritual riches, philosophical riches, and in some sense, religious riches. So when Rabbi Blake asked if I would be able to come to spend the Shabbat prior to Slichot in the community, I ran and did not walk from Jerusalem to Scottsdale. Yes. Now, I have to say that what we are doing as we prepare for Slichot, while it may be one of the first or perhaps the only time that members of this wandering tribe called the Jewish people have actually invited Bob Zimmerman, otherwise known as Bob Dylan, as the warm-up act for the divine. We're not afraid of trying tonight because so much of Dylan's work applies to the work that is the work of Slichot, the work of this season. It is the season of repentance. We call it Tshuva, as we learned this morning with a group in the Center for Jewish Life just behind us. There is a sensibility that comes with the season, and Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger didn't get along all so well, but to every season, turn, turn, turn. Turning is the essence of the word tshuva. It means to turn. You could be turning over another leaf. You could be turning your face from one year that's behind you to the face that's ahead of you. You could be turning in the sense of changing your aspirations, your behavior. You might be turning the wheel of relationships, places where you're hurt, places where you're lonely, places where you want to celebrate in the coming year where there may have been sorrow. This is the essence of repentance. And we begin the process of the season of tshuva, the season of turning and repentance, with slichot. And as Rabbi Blake said, the meaning of slichot is sorry, saris, chanting saris, opening ourselves up to our vulnerabilities. It's something we do individually. It's something we do together. Now, Bob Dylan, way up north in the Hibbing Yeshiva, way up at Herzl Camp, was not planning in any way whatsoever for his work to serve as the warm-up act for Slichot. It's clear. As mysterious as Dylan may be, he's very clear about that. He does not serve any master, and he certainly doesn't serve any particular tradition. And yet, what I'm interested in doing with you, briefly as we prepare for Slichot, is to think about how this character, this figure, this mystery, this enigma within an enigma of popular culture, who has meant so much to so many creative thinkers and singers and filmmakers and writers and obviously music fans, how it is that 5 of the stages of the process of tshuva, of repentance, that we begin tonight with slichot, is actually embedded within Dylan's music. It's not because Dylan is a graduate, not of HUC and not of JTS. It is because Dylan deals in the coin of great ideas. The ideas that drove the sages of blessed memory in late antiquity, the ideas that drove Moses Maimonides in the Middle Ages, the ideas that drove Moses Mendelssohn in the pre-modern age, the ideas that drove Abraham Joshua Heschel in the modern age, and the ideas that drive us now. So I'm going to share 5 reflections on tshuva, on repentance, through the lens of some excerpts of song. And I hope that you'll find it as a kind of window or gate or opportunity for reflection about what you would like to bring to your season of tshuva, your season of repentance and reflection that begins here with us together tonight. It's also the season of falling. It's the fall. That was fake. That was just to generate some sympathy from the crowd. Now, as I said, there are 5 sorts of stages that I want to imagine with you that Dylan encounters in music, in the themes of his lyrics and song, which reflect upon 5 values that we may encounter in thinking about tshuva and thinking about repentance. And the first one is how difficult it is. How difficult it is to turn, to change. If tshuva means turning and changing direction, changing your face, changing the mask that you may wear, there is an element, and Dylan shares this element as a young songwriter in a song called Gates of Eden. Now, I'm just going to play a few verses of this song, and then I want to think with you a little bit about how the first element of tshuva is the seeming impossibility of finding a space in this world, on this earth, where we actually get to something that feels like truth. Of war and peace, the truth just twists. Its curfew goal, it glides. Upon 4-legged forest clouds, the cowboy angel rides. With his candle lit into the sun, though its glow is waxed in black. except when 'neath the trees of Eden the lamppost stands with folded arms, its iron claws attached to curbs 'neath holes where babies wail, though it shadows metal badge. All in all can only fall with a crashing but meaningless blow. No sound ever comes from the gates of Eden. At dawn, my lover comes to me and tells me of her dreams, with no attempt to shovel the glimpse into the ditch of what each one means. At times I think there are no words but these which seem most true. Yet there are no truths outside the gates of Eden. And there are no truths outside the gates of Eden. There are no truths outside the gates of Eden. That is a hard place to start the process of tshuva. The place which says that we can take an extreme position and say that there is a gap or a wall or a bridge too far between the truth of the divine as it's symbolized in the metaphor from our tradition and from so many traditions of Eden, the place of perfection where it all started, humanity all started there, and our very messy lives. And Dylan says, we can't go back. We can't go back to the garden. And that is a place of challenge and frustration, which is a place which is very real to thinking about how we can engage in the process of slichot, the process of repentance, the process of turning, of tshuva. But as we sang last night and learned last night, there is a place where that gap, where that wall dissipates. Something softens, something opens, something becomes available to us because there is, despite the seeming impossibility of connecting with the truth that is the divine, there is something of a longing which brings us to a place where we ask maybe for help, maybe for a way in, maybe for a way to connect. And we sang last night in context of Shabbat, of Kabbalat Shabbat, and the welcoming of the Sabbath bride, the song, O Sister. Later in Dylan's career, about 10 years after the song Gates of Eden. And I'll share a verse with you. Oh, sister, when I come to lie in your arms, don't turn me away, you create sorrow. Time is an ocean, but it ends at the shore. You may not see me tomorrow. We all know what it's like, I hope, to fall in love. And many times, the times when we fall in love are the times when we allow ourselves to long for love. So in the impossibility of finding love, there is an opening that comes in the longing for it. And that's the symbol and the metaphor of O Sister. And it's a metaphor that's apropos to the time of slichot. Because slichot is actually traditionally something that takes place in the off hours of our lives. It's atypical for us, though we may gather together for Havdalah on a regular basis. It's atypical for us to have a service with the kind of penitential prayer and reflection and crying out that takes place on this evening, which is the first night of Slichot. And if you come from a more traditional perspective or a Sephardic perspective, you may have already started saying Slichot 3 weeks ago, early in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, which some of you commuters may be familiar with. But what about commuting to a sense of opening oneself up to a longing for connecting with a truth that is the divine? And so there's an element of impossibility, those gates of Eden that we can't crack, but somehow, a little spark, a little opening, as Leonard Cohen taught, and he is more than welcome here, Leonard Cohen, in our tent of Dylan. There's a crack in everything, he sings. That's how the light gets in, right? And that's how the longing gets in. So let's imagine ourselves in a process whereby we actually have a crack where the light can get in. And we can see that maybe there's something that can bring us to a connection between the truth that seems so far away beyond us in the gates of Eden to a place where we can actually feel like we ourselves are part of something greater than ourselves. So the next song I want to share with you, and it's one that we sang in full this morning in our study, is Every Grain of Sand. I want to share with you the last verse. So that's a spoiler alert. If you are keeping score at home, there are 5 verses, and this is the last of them. Every grain of sand seems like a psalm. It has the structure of refrain, every grain of sand at the end of each collection of verses. The reflection brings us back to an understanding that we ourselves, each of us, are like a grain of sand on the endless beach in which all of creation exists. So as we reflected this morning, the value in this song that so aligns with the values of this season of turning repentance, tshuva, is humility. Humility. I am just a grain of sand. And yet, after we hear that verse, I want to reflect with you about how that humility actually is an invitation to be part of something very, very grand. So this is the last verse. I have gone from rags to riches in the sorrow of the night, in the violence of a summer's dream, in the chill of a wintry light, in the bitter dance of loneliness, fading into space, in the broken mirror of innocence, in each forgotten face. I hear the ancient footsteps like the motion of the sea. Sometimes I turn, there's someone there, but other times it's only me. I'm hanging in the balance of the reality of man, like every sparrow falling, like every grain of sand. So yes, we are tiny, little, microscopic elements of this infinitely endless world. And yet, as Dylan says, as we are hanging in the balance of reality of man and feeling very small and feeling deeply humble, every grain of sand is part of creation. So much of the liturgy that we encounter in Slichot, on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, is a call to both think of ourselves as a grain of sand, so small, such a little part of the reality of man, of humankind, but also to tell us, not even in a whisper, but out loud, we can access the King of Kings. We can access the divine. We can access the energies of the spheres. And that there is a time set aside every single year where we are invited, even commanded, to come before our Creator and to expose ourselves in a way that allows us to both be humble and very, very big. That grain of sand, that sensibility, it is the result of a longing that comes from a place of feeling stuck. Now, these things don't necessarily take place in order. They are like a spiral. There's this teaching that there is no early or late in the Torah. In other words, we see in the tradition how over the course of time, there is no real chronology. When Moses Maimonides puts himself back into the shoes of Moses, Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu, we are breaking down time. We are reversing time. We are turning time the way that Teshuvah asks us to turn ourselves. And this is one of the magical elements of the Jewish tradition, and really any religious tradition. How do we enter in to those many, many specters and many, many energies and many, many phases of life? That's why this is the season of repentance. It's not a single day. That's why we start with Slichot and gradually work our way towards the coronation, as Rabbi Blake mentioned, this time of creating the majesty, the sense of majesty, and the kingship that is what Rosh Hashanah focuses on. And then we come to those gates of mercy, and we try, in the words of a poet that is getting a lot of play here this Shabbat, we try to get to heaven before they close the door. The air is getting hotter. There's a rumbling in the sky. I've been wading through high muddy water with the heat rising in my eyes. Every day your memory goes dimmer. It doesn't haunt me like it did before. I've been walking through the middle of nowhere, trying to get to heaven before they close the door. Gonna sleep down in the parlor, gonna relive my dreams. I close my eyes and I wonder, is everything as hollow as it seems? Some trains don't pull no gamblers, no midnight ramblers like they did before. I've been to Sugar Town, I shook the sugar down. I'm trying to get to heaven before they close the door. So we think of Ne'ilah, right? That's the last phase in this journey, which is called the season of repentance. Ne'ilah, the locking. The locking of the gates of mercy, the closing of the door. Did Bob Dylan actually study in the same yeshiva as Moses Ibn Ezra, who created one of the most beloved penitential prayers, El Norah Alilah, which is the story of Ne'ilah? Do you actually think that Dylan was a 14th century sage studying with Moses Ibn Ezra? What kind of crowd is this? It's a Jewish crowd. We'll argue about it later. It's because the great idea that we could actually engage in a process where we are so close to getting into that gates of Eden. One of my favorite parallels in the Jewish canon is the parallel between the story Before the Law by Franz Kafka and a song like Trying to Get to Heaven Before They Close the Door. For those of you who have not listened to your Kafka Greatest Hits album in a while, and I know you're out there, well, the story goes something like this, and I'll just say that many years ago, the Jewish Museum had an exhibition that was established initially in Spain, and it came, and it was basically Kafka's Prague, and it was this incredible exhibition, and I went to it twice, and one of the times I took my then 3-year-old daughter in the stroller. I didn't think she was paying attention, and at the end of the tour, she says, Abba, I don't like Kafka. I like Kafka. What can I say? The story Before the Law, where a man from the country comes to the gates of the law, and there is a guard there guarding the gates, and he asks for entrance, and the guard's silent. The man waits and waits and waits and waits. There's a little banter between the guard and the man from the country. A little of this and a little of that, but time passes, a lot of time passes, until the man is hunched over and old, and even the fleas in the hat of the guard are starting to make fun of the man a little bit. And he asks one last time for entry into, through, past that door, past that gate. But he's too old and tired to actually rise up and open it. And the guard says, it's such a shame, because this gate, it was meant for you all along. That's your gate. But now I'm going to close it. This story, this trying to get to heaven before they close the door, it shows up in Kafka for the same reason that it shows up in Dylan. And by the way, my kids don't really like Dylan much either. I'm 0 for 2 in my Jewish iconoclastic education. I'm going to have a convening with Rabbi Blake. We have to figure out what's going on here. How can we bring the next generation forward? I've shared a lot with you about my kids just now. That's enough. The reason, again, why these ideas appear as they do, so starkly, so beautifully in literature and in music, is because we all long to get to that Garden of Eden with which we began the conversation. The magical, truthful, divine, light-filled space behind this imagined door that we want to enter. This is also the story of the season of repentance and tshuva. As we reflected last night, the sound of the shofar that we'll hear shortly, it is a sound that we hear individually through our own ears, in our own space, in our own moment, but we do it communally. It is not just one gate. It is not just one voice. It is that there is a gate and a voice for every single person who chooses to be brave and knock on the door, to try to get to heaven before they close the door. And this is, for me, the fifth gate. None is more important than the other, but for me, this is the one that's the most fun. Maybe counterintuitively, but this is the one where actually there are two gates. There's a gate leading out, and there's a gate leading in. And this is the gateway that I call vulnerability. To open oneself up to the possibility that, yes, I may just be a grain of sand on the beach, but also this gate, if I pay close enough attention to it, if I allow myself to focus on it, if I'm honest with myself about how I got to it, if I recognize that whatever is guarding or locking that gate is in fact a reflection of myself, I can be open to the possibility of entering it. Now this, to me, this reflection on vulnerability is in some sense the same way we might reflect upon what it means to know how to love. I'm sitting on my terrace, Dylan sings. And he sings at the age of 81. Now, you may think he sounds like he's been 81 for 60 years. That is possible. And as we said yesterday in our pre-neg, one of the interesting nuances of Dylan's career is that his first album, titled Bob Dylan, were almost all songs about death. And he sounded like an old man in a lot of ways on those songs. The reversing of time, the breaking down of time. But here at the age of 81, he sounds almost like a gleeful teenager. Again, Leonard Cohen, if you ever saw him in concert when he was in his late 70s, he used to skip across the stage. Did anyone ever see Leonard Cohen in concert and see that? He skipped across the stage. He would take his hat in his hand and he would skip joyously across the stage. This ability to remain alive and vulnerable to the world is, to me, one of the bravest things that a person can do. It's the vulnerability that would have let the man from the country actually stand up, dust himself off, and say to the guard, I want to go inside. I want to see the light beyond this gate. That's the vulnerability that opens us up to ask the questions and to open ourselves to the answer. You know, tshuva in Hebrew also means an answer. Like on a quiz, or if someone asks you a question, you give them a tshuva. Hebrew does not have as many words as English does. So many times the words mean more than one thing. In order to get a good answer, you have to prepare a good question. And in order to prepare a good question, you have to know what you want. I'm sitting on my terrace, lost in the stars, listen to the sounds of the sad guitars. Been thinking all over, been thinking it all through. I've made up my mind to give myself to you. I saw the first falling snow. I saw the flowers, saw them come and go. I don't think that anyone ever knew. But I've made up my mind to give myself to you. So much of this season asks us to dig deep, to find a question and to ask for an answer. The questions are often, who will I be this year? Who will I remember this year that was with me in the last year but won't be with me in the year to come? What will the world look like if we imagine what the world looked like a year ago, and with all that we've struggled through, and all that we've lived through, and all that kept us apart, and all that brought us together? Teshuvah is about turning. It is about change. But it is ultimately about the question that we're willing to make ourselves vulnerable to ask of ourselves and others. So teshuvah, answer. The answer is in the question of how much we're ready to know, how much we're ready to feel, how much we're ready to hope, and this is all embedded in the world of Dylan and in the world of the prayers that we'll sing together in just a few moments. So I thank you for allowing me to reflect a bit on teshuvah and to share some of the thoughts of our dear friend Bob Dylan, and to sneak in a little Leonard Cohen and Kafka while we did it. And I can still say Shabbat Shalom, and that will probably be the last time I'll get to say that to you until next Shabbat. So thank you so much. And thank you, Rabbi Blake, and the wonderful clergy, and all of your clergy who are here tonight with your community of communities. It's a beautiful evening, and I'm so honored to be with you. Thank you.
Stephen Arnoff, thank you so much for taking us from just outside the gates of Eden to a little bit closer to heaven just before they close the door. As we enter into the days of awe, the holiest season of the year, the time of yearning, the time of turning, and the time of becoming anew. We're so happy that you joined us tonight. We're going to take a little bit of a break to socialize as a community. We have copies of Dr. Arnoff's book about man and God and law. I can tell you it's a fantastic read. Even if you're not a Dylan-phile, if you are just a person who cares about the journey of the Spirit and want to go on that journey with one of the great religious voices of our time. Because the theme of the book is not just about Dylan's writing, Dylan's art. It's also about how in the modern era, rock and roll has become one way in which people go on the religious quest. Rock and roll actually has become perhaps the common language of meaning and the quest for meaning in our time. So I think you'll get a lot out of it, whatever your feelings about or relationship with Dylan may be. It's a fantastic read and a wonderful high holiday read as well. So I heartily commend it to all of you. And you're able to interact with its author tonight for a few moments. We also will have a lovely dessert reception inside the lobby atrium area, and then a few moments after that, we will kind of create a transition at this season of transitions, a transition from Shabbat to the new week, a transition into the last full week of the year 5782. We do get kind of like a one-day week in 5782 because Rosh Hashanah begins a week from tomorrow at sundown. So after Havdalah, The brief ritual, which we'll do as a community in that central space in our atrium, will then make our way all the way into the sanctuary for our Slichot service, which will be led by the many rabbis and cantors who have joined us from our combined Reform Jewish communities tonight. So I'll wish you an almost Shavua Tov, and please go meet one another, interact with somebody from a congregation that is not the one where you affiliate, and please take a few moments also to introduce yourself to Stephen Arnoff. Once again, please join me in thanking our guest.